Hello, everyone, and welcome to the June 2026 Integration Down Under. Got a few slides to go through, and then I'll get started. So our organizers are Martin, Dan, Mick, Wagner, and myself. Dan's on the call with me today, and the talk tonight is me. So you get to listen to me for the whole time. And basically, it's why Logic Apps are better for integration workloads. It is a little bit controversial because a lot of people are doing integration with functions and things like that. So we'll see how you go with looking at what I've presented here tonight, and I'll have some time for questions at the end. You can post into the questions on the YouTube Live, and they'll show up on my screen. Okay, so let me go on to my deck. I'm just going to get rid of Dan and I's faces off this while we do this. So here we go. And so why Azure Logic Apps are better for integration workloads. And one of the things is, this is my opinion, my experience over the last several years working with integration workloads. I started with BizTalk in 2001. So basically, that's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about here. So here's some details about me. And for some reason, this slide, when I converted it into StreamYard, just completely messed up. It's the only slide that did, but there it is. So it's the cloud platform and API evangelist for 6pivot. BizTalk Bill's my Twitter handle, and my Blue Sky, biztalkbill.com. So basically, a little bit of the agenda for tonight is a bit of integration workloads, a little bit about supportability, and then basically our options for integration workloads, Logic App Standard, Function Apps, and Web API. We'll talk a little bit about Logic App Standard, Function Apps, and Web API. I'm kind of lumping into one. A little bit of testing there at the end if my demos gods help out, because so far they've been acting up a little bit lately. New pieces into Visual Studio Code, so we'll see how that goes. So what I mean by integration workloads, it's typically you only have control of one side. It may be an external input or an external output that you're writing to. So a lot of times they may be SaaS applications, but they also may be applications coming from a trading partner or something like that. And a lot of times that people will make insignificant changes, or at least they thought they were insignificant changes, that causes your application not to work. And also the other thing that I've seen is that SaaS applications, they upgrade occasionally, or somebody in your organization even may go in and do a customization, add a field, something like that, that may change the data that's coming into you. The other big thing I've run into in the development I've done in the last couple of years is that test data. And we know that there's a big push that you really shouldn't be using production data in your test environment. So basically, you need to have test. And what I found is that a lot of times that test data could be something that people have manually entered. And it may be that, okay, they've got the spec and you need to have these fields, these fields, these fields. And what you see a lot of times is that they may enter data slightly differently than it gets entered into the production system. And we had this is one of the perfect cases, is that the test data always had this one array of data in it. And there was a requirement in the requirements that you needed to look at a field in that array. But one of the first things that we did when we hit the test environment is that the function app started failing because that array wasn't there. But it wasn't obvious because we got that classic message of object not set to an instance of an object. And as we all know, that's the fun one because it really doesn't tell you. And even when you went into the application insights, we had it all wired up for application insights. And it gave us that happened. Excuse me. But it didn't tell us where it happened. So basically, for this particular example, I had to take the message that we got in, bring up the application in Visual Studio, in the debugger, run the message in, and basically step through all of the areas in the application. And I finally found that, it was counting on this field to be in there. There was an array that was empty. So it basically didn't find it. And I mean, granted, you could make especially now with AI, you could make your code very, very defensive. So checking every single field, but developers typically don't do that. So, and again, the other thing that you might hit is dependencies on other systems and networks. So if the other systems are down, or if the other systems have a network issue, something like that, it's going to fail. And what we'll see is that when we get into the Logic App side of things, we'll see that because you got that run history in there, it's much easier to figure out where things have gone wrong, and also a bit on how to fix it once you've seen that. So let's talk a little bit about supportability. Now, being a developer and a consultant for most of my career, consultants don't seem to be as concerned how supportable an application is. And that's one of the things that you run into, is that a lot of times if developers are on a contract, they come in, they develop some code, and then they leave. And they're not the one that's set behind the desk trying to support these applications. So that's one of the things that we need to do. And when we look at this, is figure out how easy it is to support these applications. Is it easy to tell why they failed? Is it easy to restart them and be able to get the process back up and going without a lot of intervention? And again, in the one thing that I've seen in any of the .NET code with your writing, a lot of times you'll get an object reference not set to an instance of an object. And so basically you start digging through the code, and it could be 3 or 4 different places, 4 or 5 different places, and you don't really know. And it could be buried, especially when you do a lot of inheritance and classes. This class will call another class, or call another class that does a particular part of the data mapping or data manipulation. You won't know exactly where to look. And one of the things we'll see with Logic Apps is that because we see that run history and it's there and it's available, we can see what came in, and then we can see where it failed. And for non-developers, how easy is the process to restart? And I mean, we can do stuff around this. We can do messages to a dead letter queue. We can have the messages in those different things that we can restart. One thing we will see in Logic Apps is the ability to restart an existing process. And one of the really nice features I like is the ability to deploy a new version of that Logic app and then restart that message that failed. So if you have to fix something, you can still restart that particular message, and it will pick up the new version of that Logic app, which I think is something very unique to Logic Apps, the way it works. So let's look at our options. So we've got Logic Apps. And again, this brings me back to a classic line from a good friend of mine, Mitch Denny, when I was first starting with BizTalk, and we were first starting with the .NET framework. So I was part of some of the initial .NET user groups that were meeting here in Melbourne. And basically it was in beta of .NET 1.0. And basically he didn't like BizTalk because you couldn't develop the code in Notepad. And that was the big thing with the .NET early on. You could basically write all your code in Notepad and then run the command line tools to build that and things like that. And again, I've got a little bit of a interesting thing to show you at the end, some of the new stuff coming out with Logic Apps around the codeful side of things. And just to give a little bit of a plug, we've got Wagner going to be doing a talk on the codeful Logic Apps in July. So just watch out. As soon as this talk is done, I'll get that other talk posted up on the integration down under website. So function apps and web API pretty much get lumped together because they're both code-based. So basically you write .NET code and basically you debug it and things like that. And then you've got it hooked up to application insights. A lot of times you might find the error in application insights, digging through the logs. But again, depending on how busy your system is, there could be a lot of logs to dig through. What we're not going to consider today for integration workloads is anything like Data Factory. So you might be doing big data bundles coming in, and you need to use Data Factory to work through that. Most of my integration I try to do as a message-based integration so that you're not dealing with the nightly dump of a database or something like that. So that's basically what we're looking at. And I'm also not going to talk about any of the other third-party integration tools. So it's basically looking at the Microsoft stack with Logic Apps and Function Apps. So with our Logic Apps Standard, and I'm talking about Logic Apps Standard because that's pretty much what I'm working in these days, because a lot of the customers want that stuff to be inside of a VNet and protected. So Logic Apps Standard is what we're using because that gives us that ability to put it inside of a VNet and work with it. There's 1,400 plus connectors. You've got that visual run history. You can restart at a particular action if you need to restart. And it's got some extensive built-in logging. It'll actually show you kind of out of the box if you hook it up to Log Analytics that this action started, this action stopped, this workflow started, this workflow finished. All of that information by not really adding anything to your code. You get some of that logging just out of the box, basically, to look at. And then you can see the actions that failed, the actions that were skipped, any of those kind of things that you want to look at there. So you've got that extensive logging that you can use in there. With our function apps, it's all code. There is in preview now the ability to use the 1,400 Logic App connectors in your function app. So this kind of, for some people that are diehard coders and would rather do coding than the visual designer of the Logic Apps, you've got that ability here now to leverage some of those connectors. Because that's been one of the big points that Logic Apps let you get started a little bit quicker because you've got built-in connectors that make it easier to do that. You do, with function apps, get minimal logging out of the box. So basically you wire up application insights to it and you'll get some that the function started, function ended, it failed, something like that in there. And you do get a little bit of that dependency logging from application insights. So it went off to SQL, it went off to this website, things like that. You can add extensive custom logging. And again, this is one of the things that I think that some people may take advantage of some of the AI tools now to generate, basically tell it to generate logging at a lot more logging than you would if you were putting it in by hand. And again, you can do custom data validation, JSON serialization, XML serialization. You can check a lot of the fields. You can do that kind of validation in there. But what I've found is that even in the BizTalk days, there was some validation. But depending on the size of your schemas and things like that, there were a lot of optional fields. So even though they were optional in the schema, you may have been counting on them for particular types of data. But because they were either commercial schemas or schemas that you'd gotten from your trading partners, you didn't have a lot of control over what the fields, the required fields were and things like that. So there is some stuff there around that data validation. And again, this is some place that AI probably fits a little bit. I know that most people now aren't writing your own unit tests. You're basically going and letting AI write the unit test for you. But you can also let it do more extensive validation of the data that's in and out, as long as all of the messages contain all of the data. There is some things in there where you might have situations where you've got data coming from different sources, different trading partners, things like that, that some of that validation works for one of the trading partners, but not all of the trading partners. Now, we will talk a little bit about testing. So unit testing, I understand a lot of people's feelings on unit testing, but the interesting thing that I find is in the integration space, I don't think that the unit testing is as valuable as integration tests, because the unit tests are testing bits in our code. And typically what we're doing in an integration workload is we're getting a message in, we're doing some mapping from one document to another document, and then we're writing that data into another system. So unit tests, a lot of times, if I've got code that's doing calculations or doing some very extensive manipulation, then the unit test will help me make sure that I don't have any issues in that particular code that I'm running. But I think from the point of view of both like my BizTalk days and the integration with in Azure, the integration testing is much better because you're actually feeding messages in, seeing how they process. But once I said that, there is a lot more work to do successful integration testing. There's stuff in there that you might have to do around how you generate the data. And again, going back to one of the earlier topics I talked about, is getting test data is the hard part. You don't always have really good test data. AI will help us a little bit with that, but you do need to basically do some work around getting that test data to do those. And also with integration tests is, do you mock out the endpoints so that you can run the same tests over and over? Do you have a environment where you can clean out the databases and things like that to where you can rerun the same messages? Or do you have to have something that's actually going to generate unique messages so that you can run those integration tests? So, and again, this applies whether you're doing function apps or logic apps. It's harder to do those integration tests. And again, with BizTalk, it was even harder because you technically had to load BizTalk up in an environment to do that before you got to your deployment environments, say your dev, test, UAT. Typically, the build server had BizTalk on it so that you could do those type of integration tests. So now we're going to see if my demos are behaving themselves. So we'll see how that works. I just need to move some screens around here in just a second. Let me just move some stuff around. And again, if there's any questions, you can actually post those in on the YouTube Live and they'll show up on my screen. Let me just get rid of that. Let me get into here and just give me a second and I will come over to this screen and see if I can start debugging on this without any problems. Okay, so let me remove that and add my code to the screen. So basically what we're going to start with is looking a little bit at Visual Studio Code and the Logic Apps. And just see if I can get this particular project to load into the debugger. I was having trouble earlier with that just because that it had decided to download some new packages this afternoon. So we'll see how we go on that. And then I will bring up, also I've got my, just a fairly clean sample of a function app, and we'll run that off and see how we go with that. I've got that set up on a, got that actually deployed into Azure so we can actually look at that from the Azure point of view. Let's hop back to the Logic app. And so it is still building that. So let's give that a couple of minutes. So if we go back to the function app, we'll see that, okay, here is the good case of that. Let's just go to here. And I've got all of my data and everything's good there. So I can send that request and we get a 200 and get the data back. This particular one, we're missing some of that shift data. And and again, this is kind of what happened. We're missing a block of data, but we had things like we had a check in there that it needed to look at the total hours. But all of the test data that we got had all of the data in it. Sometimes it didn't have shifts, but it had all of the rest of that shift data in there. So let's go and basically send that request. And we got 500 internal server error. So, and if we go look at the application insights for that, we would see that basically that we got objects not set to a reference. And basically that failed. So let's see what we've got here and go into our Logic app and let's go into our debugger. Still starting on that. It's just taking a long time to do that. Let's just go into our workflow. And we can see this is our workflow designer, or this is just the actual code workflow. So the interesting thing is you could write Logic apps in Notepad if you wanted, but basically it's not something that you would do out of a lack of a designer. Let's just see if that finally gets the debugger loaded up. And let's go to this workflow. No, we haven't quite got there yet. But we are getting close. We can go to the overview of this, and this is how I'm running this locally so that we can see how it works. So there's basically the overview of that. And I do have a testing REST piece here that I can run against it. And let's see, those are all local. So let's grab that payload, go back to our overview, and let's see, run the trigger. That's not going to run it with any data. So basically, let's grab the callback URL and go back here to our testing REST and update the post address to the address that we've got for our local host. Go back to the overview, and in just a second, we should see that particular run come up. Except it is being a little bit stubborn, it looks like. Let's do, if we can see if we can send this request. And of course not. So that is actually, looks like it's doing something.
Bill, while we're waiting for that to load, is it worth showing the designer?
Probably. It just depends on whether it'll come up while it is.
It's still loading.
It's trying to debug. So, yeah, it's a little bit annoying because it decided to reload everything for me this afternoon. Let's still trying to send that. Oh, we got a run. Okay, so let's see. This is the second run. We should be able to see what the history looks like in there. And of course, my machine's cooperating just like it would for if the debug gods were upset at me. Because I've got that designer trying to load in the background. Okay. And let's see. There we go. And we still don't have that. Oh, that's probably the one that didn't have any data. Let's go back to here. See if we can get this one to load. Yeah, so this is one that failed because that was the empty payload that we got in. And we can tell that by looking at the raw output of that. And basically, we got content length of 0. So, and that's one of the things that I'm talking about for Logic Apps is that, okay, we get a failure. So how do we tell what that failure is? We can go in there and we can see where it failed. Let's go try to run that other. Let me just see if I can find my testing REST. Let's try to run that again. And go back to that. That's the workflow we were at a minute ago. get rid of that. Go back to the overview. We've got the third one that is actually currently running. So let's do and that failed. And again, so content must be of type JSON. So let's go look at our testing rest. Ah, that's what I got rid of. Content type, application JSON. And let's try that again. Go back to our overview, and we do have it running again. So, and again, all of those things were easy for me to tell what was happening without going deep in the logs. And if I had this deployed to Azure, we would see the same thing, being able to go into Azure and look at the run history of the application in Azure. So all of those things really help when you're doing integration workloads. So if we see that now, we'll see that it's gone through the parse JSON. We can see the data that came in. We can see the data that went out of that. You can see it broke up the fields that it knew about. It initialized some variables, basically with that variable that we had, and then it sent that response. So if I go back into the testing rest and I grab the local address, go down here and take this one that is missing the data, and then we go and run that again. Go back into our overview. We see the one that's running. And do a refresh. See if we can load anything up there. Okay, so you see now it failed, and you see exactly where it failed. You could look at that in there and say, okay, I'm unable to process it. Well, it couldn't initialize the variable. Okay, so why? That doesn't help. That the place it failed doesn't help us. But the fact that we can actually go back into the previous step and then look at the data that we got, and then go into here, look at the code view and say, okay, we're trying to parse the data. We're trying to look at shift data and total hours. Go back here and look, and there is no shift data in the data that came in. So either the person that sent me the data is sending me the wrong data, or there's an issue with that particular data coming out of a SaaS system or something like that. And we've got that really good way to look at that. And I think that one of the things I try to do when I build Logic Apps is to do things in try-catch, but I also will send the run ID. So you can see that kind of GUID at the, not a GUID, but it's a long number here. That's the run ID of this particular run. So if we were in Azure and I sent you a Teams message or something with the run ID, you could go to the workflow, you could paste in the run ID, and you would find the run history and be able to look at that and debug what happened to it. And then if we needed to, we could deploy a new version of this Logic app and run it with that same data that came in, and then be able to make sure that that's working. It's a little bit harder when you've got a request response, because it won't send, it doesn't have a request coming in, but it can rerun that data. So that's one of the nice things, I think, that why Logic Apps really set better for those integration workloads, because again, you typically only have control of one side of the equation. Either the input or the output is what you have control over. Let me just remove that screen now and go back to the slides real quick. So basically, we've looked at those. And again, the summary is kind of the fact that we've got consultant developers sometimes forget about the people that need to support the integrations. And it's interesting, Dan and I have both been on that, both the consultant developer side of things, but we've also been a little bit in some of the managed services spaces where we're having to support some of these issues. And those, you need as much information as possible to make that support an easy. And again, a lot of times the people that get lumped with support are your junior developers, and they may not have the skills yet to be able to go dig deeply into these issues to figure out what they are. And like the one that I had is I had to load it up in the development environment in my Visual Studio and submit a message. Sometimes that's not going to be possible. So it's really hard to figure out without very extensive knowledge of that data to know exactly what's going on. So let's go to the next one. I've got some questions. I'm going to give you I'm going to remove this and I'm going to add this guy. I want to go show you one of the new things coming to Logic Apps. And this is the codeful workflows. So this is a C# version of a workflow. You set up your triggers, and you've got, this is calling off to and then it gets a response. So this looks like normal .NET code. So why am I so excited about this? Two things, I think, is that the AI tools are probably going to have an easier time building these codeful workflows because they are just .NET code. But you have that thing that if we go here now and we start debugging on this, and hopefully this basically doesn't take as long to load. But what I want to show you is the feature you get because it is a Logic app. There's some features in there that make it, that differentiate it from writing code in a function app or a web app. So this is going to take a couple of minutes to build and everything. But the fact that we wrote the workflow in C# inside of our Logic App Standard project. And I'll show you why I'm so excited about these codeful workflows. And again, like I said, we've got Wagner doing a presentation. I think it's the 9th of July, but let me confirm it. And then he's going to talk a lot deeper about these codeful workflows and why you should be interested. Now, the other nice thing is that you can have a workspace that has both the conventional workflow JSON files, and you can have the codeful workflows in the same Logic App Standard project. So that gives you the flexibility that if you really need to do something or want to do something simple in a normal JSON-based workflow, that's fine. If you need then to go do something a little more complex in the codeful workflows. So it is trying to build it still, but you can see, and then also you've got a program CS in here that is where it loads up and discovers all of your workflows that are in your project. And this is one of the interesting things about the difference, the way that you do. Okay, it's not happy with me because I've got the other debugger running. And basically it's trying to share that port. Let's just see if I can run that again, start debugging. It should be a little bit quicker this time, hopefully. because I got rid of that other debugger running. Dan, have you had a chance to play with any of the Codeful stuff yet?
Not yet, but it does look very intriguing.
Not yet.
Yeah, and I like the fact that you
So-
said that you can run Codeful and the standard JSON one in the same Logic app. That's very excellent.
Workflows in the same project. So, and then there's a little bit of a plug out there while we're waiting for this to do. I am trying to get Harold from the product group to do a talk for Integration Down Under on the BizTalk to Logic Apps migration tool that they've built. So that's going to be interesting, especially for us diehard BizTalk people. With BizTalk going fully out of support 2030, but out of mainstream support in 2028. So there's it's going to become a little bit more of a pressing issue as it goes out of mainstream support. Because the work I've done with BizTalk recently has been because the security people have figured out that the BizTalk support, the support for Windows and SQL is out. So these machines are setting in your network basically without any support, some of the security patches and things like that. So they wanted to upgrade. So that's basically the upgrades that I've done lately to BizTalk, is to go from an older version of BizTalk to the 2020. So it's supported. So I think we're pretty close. Let's see if I can do overview on this. And you'll notice I did an overview on the program.cs. And let's run the trigger. And this is something that I did not expect from the Codeful side of things. I didn't expect it to be able to produce the run history the same way that the JSON-based workflows did. And this is why I'm really excited about the Codeful stuff, is because we've got that same run history that we have for our JSON-based workflows. And I think this is going to be a game changer in some of the stuff. For those people that don't want to do visual designing, they can then go in here now, write it in C# and the workflow CS file and build it, deploy it, but still have the advantages of the Logic App run history. So let me remove that. So I'll put that back up. I don't see there's not any questions posted in the YouTube channel. But again, thanks everyone. And basically reach out if you need to. Like I said, I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter, BizTalk Bill, pretty easy to find. And like I told somebody when I was recently that I'm looking at retiring in the early 2030s. BizTalk's going away in 2030. BizTalk Bill will stay around until BizTalk kind of goes away. I don't have to go to Logic App Bill, which doesn't sound quite the same. So let me just add Dan. You want to hop onto the screen? So thanks everyone for attending. And I hope you got something out of that. I know that sometimes it's hard to convince people that you need to do the stuff in Logic Apps. But I really think from the integration perspective, it gives us a lot easier way to support and manage the integrations as opposed to what we would see in something like functions. And I think that, again, you could throw AI at the functions, but I think when you hit those object not set to an instance of an object, I don't think it's going to be any better at figuring it out than
I was going to add how great it is to have that run history and that graphical view of debugging, rather than having to spend a bunch of AI tokens to get back information that probably isn't as helpful anyway.
Yeah, so I mean that's the big thing, I think, is that visual run history. And I mean, there are certain cases where if you've got information that is security sensitive, that you will have it blocked, but you'll still see where it failed and how far it got, things like that. I think that is the really good feature that we've got with our Logic Apps. I mean, BizTalk did this to an extent because you had the orchestration designer and the orchestration debugger that you could restart a message or restart an orchestration and run it in the debugger and see where it got to before it failed and things like that. So it's something I've been used to for a long time in the way of supporting. And again, I think that support is a really key part, because I know that I've been into some organizations and I started looking at their environment and I said, okay, why are there 10,000 of these integrations that have failed? Oh, when did they fail? So now you can go look, and it's a much easier proposition to look at how those, how they failed and how to fix them. And especially if you do a little bit of defensive coding in your Logic app, I really think you can do it to where you can actually have restart points. So if you figure out where it's failed, you can do some restart and restart at a particular action in the workflow. That's one of the features that I think is very helpful. And especially if it's a timeout to a website, you can go and restart at that website call and restart at that action. So now the website's back up. I can do restart at that action and it'll try to call that website again. So I think that's a really powerful feature too. So thanks everyone for attending. And that is all we have for today. The recording will be up shortly if people want to have a look at or get their coworkers to have a look at what we've seen in here. Thank you very much.
Good night.